January 1967, York Minster. At the base of one of 4 giant piers supporting the massive lantern tower, archaeologists are working. A film unit from Anglia Television records the scene for an archaeological program. This is the only film shot at that time, in what was to become the first desperate phase in the Battle of York Minster. It's rather like a dispatch from a war correspondent, the first news from a dugout in a new battle zone, as archaeologist Dr. Brian Hope Taylor, investigating the foundations of the great building, reveals one of the discoveries.
Well, it's been very interesting indeed. The main thing, perhaps, is that this great lantern tower, which was built, I suppose, about 550 years ago, that proves to stand on these walls, which are more ancient than you probably think.
How old are they, actually?
Well, they were built not very long after the time of William the Conqueror. And poor wall, you see, it's been standing the strain of all this architectural glory for hundreds of years, and you see what's happening to it. There's the great pier supporting the tower, and here, alas, are cracks.
This is something you didn't expect to find.
Well, it's something one's always afraid of in an ancient building, but it's quite clear now that this is a problem which can't be ignored any longer.
It's urgent.
Oh, very urgent indeed. If this is the sort of thing, if it was neglected, there could be, at any rate, partial collapse of the tower in decades, at least.
This is the death of a great cathedral. It hasn't happened yet, but it could.
If there was no Minster in York.
Why do you think the Minster's still important to us today?
Oh, it's history. It's just something that is York. People come to York and I get this very great thrill when I see the Minster. It's lovely.
Well, it's something that really must be preserved. I think it's part of our heritage, isn't it?
There's so little these days that children can see of the great deeds of the past, the great works of the past. There's so much being adulterated now in places like London, where these massive great office blocks of glass and whatnot are being erected. And I think it's important that these old buildings, which show the children which will show the children of the future something of the deeds of the past, are preserved.
This great minster is, of course, the cathedral church for the Diocese of York. This is where I have my seat as Archbishop. This is where the ordinations take place, where the city comes for its great services and so on. But of course it is, in a very real sense, the mother church of the whole northern province, the top bit of England. And here, for example, there come not only our convocations, which is the sort of parliament of the church, incidentally older than Parliament itself. Here they come for their prayer and conference. Here the consecrations of the bishops of the northern province take place. That's your second great sphere of influence. And then the third is as wide as the world, because in and out of the doors of this minster there come something like 1 million people from all over the world every year. So you see my circles of influence are very extensive.
The cathedrals of England stand like great stone giants in our landscape, each at the ancient centre point of a major region. This is the giant of Norwich, Winchester at the heart of ancient Wessex. Famous giants these, focal points today for tens of thousands of tourists and pilgrims from all over the world. Canterbury, Gloucester, Lincoln, Durham, Salisbury and the rest. A race of giants centuries old, but it could be a dying race. Even stone giants can grow infirm and suffer from diseases. No National Health Service for them, though. Medieval builders aspired to build into the sky. Their towers, like our rockets, often came to grief. At Wells in Somerset, 600 years ago, the ambitious new central tower threatened to collapse. but they saved it by a hurried technological improvisation, by using the Gothic arch, which was the theme of our medieval architecture, and turning it into a pair of crutches. At Ely, the great Norman tower actually fell not long after it was built. It was replaced with great labor and ingenuity by the superb lantern tower we see today. The medical history of Chichester Cathedral is notorious. It's an outstanding case of chronic tower trouble. After earlier catastrophes, cracks and fissures were seen to be moving in 1860. On February the 17th, 1861, afternoon service was interrupted. There was a desperate attempt to shore up the tower. And just before 1:30 on February the 18th, the spire was seen to lean and then to fall vertically into the church. The last workman had got out only half an hour before. It was all over in a few seconds. And now the giant of York, one of the greatest of them all, is gravely ill, in real peril of death.
Inside this door, a team of specialists is carrying out one of the biggest surgical operations of all time.
They're cutting deep into the guts of the giant, drilling and reinforcing its ancient bones, taking and testing samples of its tissues, and they're about to give the enormous body of this Kirk massive injections, measured not in milligrams, but in tons. They take its temperature and listen to the pulse of its vibrations. They've even removed some of its vocal cords, parts of an organ removed by surgery, stacked away, mute and seemingly dead, until they can be grafted back. Meanwhile, the famous voice box of the giant is kept clinically clean in a mask of polythene. How do we know there's something wrong with York Minster? What are the symptoms confronting the Minster's physician?
When I was appointed as surveyor of the fabric 2 years ago, I started making an inspection of the Minster. I started at the west end, then worked to the central tower and to the east end. When I got here, I found serious cracks in the piers of the tower, and it was obvious that these cracks were new and they were lengthening. I completed my inspection and we tested the masonry in the central tower by pumping in water and found that its condition was very poor. The water just leaked through the masonry as out of a sieve.
Yes. But my house has got cracks in it, but nobody thinks it's going to fall down.
Well, your house isn't York Minster. The cracks are moving and widening. We fixed telltales to them, and after 6 months, the first telltale cracked. Now 13 telltales have cracked. We have glass telltales, which are a rough and ready way of studying the movement, but now we've got a very much more scientific instrument. It's this, the DMEX strain gauge, and we measure the cracks once a week with this. To make one measurement, you measure 5 times, average it, correct for temperature, and then write it down.
And what would happen if we did nothing about it at all?
In my opinion, the Minster would fall down in about 15 years.
Before they can even think about prescribing treatments to save the Minster's life, the rescuers face an enormous fundamental problem, that of probing and probably destroying what lies underneath.
The ground that York Minster stands on is the made ground of history. Down here, there's the base of a Roman column. Here in the crypt, you stand 7 feet below the main floor level. But the Romans who first came here, they walked 9 feet deeper still. York Minster stands bang over the middle of a great Roman legionary fortress which began the whole history of York. But even when the Romans had left, when Britain was plunged into the so-called Dark Ages, even then, York remained a center of power. King Edwin of Northumbria. He was baptized in his capital in 627. Now, we don't know precisely where he built his little timber church and the stone one that followed it, but it must have been fairly near this spot. It might be just under my feet here. It might even be under the great central tower of the Minster. There's an exciting possibility that we may find the remains of one or both those Dark Age churches during the emergency excavations. What we have found so far are the massive foundations on which the walls of the early Norman cathedral were built. These are the walls, and this is the foundation here. It's a huge thing, very, very wide, built of stone and concrete, and it's got timbers running right through it. It's reinforced. It's over 900 years old, and certainly it's a key part of this engineering problem, because, as you can see, it's on this that all the enormous weight of these vast and beautiful structures we're trying to save is resting. But you see, the medieval builders couldn't build their church on solid natural ground. It just had to sit on top of the made earth of Roman York and Dark Age York. Well, that poses a modern question. What exactly is happening underneath this foundation now? Well, the answer is that the foundation is buckling, the ground is giving way. But why? Well, to find out why, we've got to dig, and quickly. But you see, this is more than just earth, it's history. This is really ground you wouldn't dream of disturbing unless you've got urgent, compelling reason to do it. And really, nowadays we have. But although this is mainly an engineering investigation, it calls for specialized surgery in the earth. In other words, modern archaeological technique. It's curious, isn't it, to find modern, hard-headed engineers actually needing to know what happened in Roman and Dark Age York.
The whole of this building is a very bold design. It's one of the biggest cathedrals in Europe, and it was superimposed on older work which was never intended to carry it. There's been bad workmanship in places, and so on.
And the trouble with the tower, for example, started
well,
early.
You know, the tower as such weighs about 20,000 tons. That's 5,000 tons per pier. There's something like a 30-foot diameter circle to support it, which is about 700 square feet. So we end up with 6 tons per square foot. Now, a modern builder would never put more than 1.5 tons on it if he started. But, of course, the building has been here a long time, so that's compressed the soil and made it better. But even so, we don't quite know what's happening, whether the lowering of the groundwater table has made the soil compress, or whether it's the old tree trunks in the mortar raft, which, because the water has been withdrawn, have rotted, and now the mortar raft is squashing up. We'd have plenty of trouble, even had it been built on rock, because arches act in the way that they push out. If there's not enough to buttress the side push, things happen, as here, where the east end has gone 2'11" out of plumb, which is quite a lot, even in the height.
Architect, engineers, archaeologists consult together.
But for the sort of deep-seated trouble,
Well, if it's the cavities left behind where the tree trunks were, if we can get at them and fill them, that's one way. Otherwise, if it is the whole soil mass moving...
The question? How to treat the progressive disease that threatens to kill the Minster. What's to be done about it?
First, the patient must be made strong enough to stand the operation. And our proposals are to put a ring beam round its middle and another beam around the top, because there's a tendency for it to move outwards here and inwards here.
Yes.
Then we will grout and reinforce the main columns. After that, we'll be ready to put the foundations in.
How much is it going to cost to prevent a disaster happening?
£2 million.
We rejoice to see this famous Christian symbol of the faithful heart of Yorkshire return to its ancient place, may we assure this congregation that the window has been replaced without any loss or hurt.
I certify that the glazier's work has been well and truly done, so that this window is now in better order and of greater beauty than living eyes ever have seen it.
York Minster is more than just a beautiful mass of ancient stone. It's the shell of a complex, living, human organism. It's alive with people.
First, let me bid you welcome to York Minster. Now, you are standing in the south transept. There were 4 earlier churches built on this site before this present minster came into being in 1220. There stood on the site a very fine Norman cathedral, which would look perhaps very much like Durham Cathedral looks today.
The cathedral's a centre too for the young, for the future. The Minster stands for the continuity of life and craftsmanship, continuity in devotion to ideals. It's the workplace of masons, carvers and glaziers, and of churchmen who are also skilled administrators and men of business.
Good morning, boys. Good morning, sir. Sit down, please.
Are you going to the church to read?
Yes, now.
I wonder if you'd mind just checking a point to do with the flower festival. It's this large cross of evergreens above the entrance to the choir.
Yes.
Do you think the chapter would agree to that?
I've had someone cry off for serving at the Sun Eucharist tomorrow. Do you think you could possibly come in instead? You know, that is for the 11:30. Excuse me, just one moment. Look, children, how many times have I got to tell you you're not to barge in when I'm on the phone?
Look in the park.
Look, sweetheart, will you please get out?
Out of there and leave Daddy alone.
Children will be children.
Come on, Debbie.
Yes, look, this is for the 11:30 tomorrow. Would that be all right?
If you've got the Walton Missa Brevis there, find page 9, will you, and we'll do the Gloria. I needn't play all this at the beginning, just a bar and a beat before you come in. All ready? 1, 2, 3, 1. Look, that bit of odd rhythm there, that dotted crotchet and, you know, tied on to God. Get that right. It's not absolutely right. You better start at God and just do that. Count carefully. 1, 2, 1, 2. Well, now, that'll need quite a lot of doing, a lot of work on it, won't it?
You're getting on with Isaiah, George?
Yes.
And Jesus is outside?
In the yard outside, yes.
As this is the last of our classes before confirmation, I thought we'd come over here into the Zouche Chapel of the Minster so that we can go through certain aspects of the communion service before you'll be making your first communions shortly.
Let's see if we can do it all the way through. Turn back to the beginning. Page, what is it? 9. Right, off we go.
Now, what about this window where the burglar broke in?
Yes, well, the damage has been repaired now, and the family's in fact ready. So.
Can we put it back in again now?
Yes.
Afternoon? Good.
Now, we said a sacrament is an...
A sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
Yes, what did she say? An outward?
Visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace.
Jolly good. Right. In the sacrament of the Holy Communion, what is the outward and visible sign, Linda?
The breaking of bread and drinking of wine.
Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is the choir of York Minster, beautiful choir. It was the third great building operation on York Minster. They built the two great transepts first, as I tried to tell you. Then they had to build the great nave westwards to match the transepts in size. This was the third great building operation. It was built in the perpendicular style, that is to say the third phase of Gothic, between 1361 and 1430, and deliberately set on fire and burnt out by a religious, wait for it, fanatic in the year 1829.
Visitors with us tonight who are not accustomed to our bells, so will you take particular care? There's a long draft of rope and they're rather heavy bells. So we'll ring a few rounds on 10 bells tonight. We'll leave the two trebles out. Carry on, Mr. Ringing Master.
Look to. Treble's going. She's gone.
York Minster, the ancient stone giant that stood for centuries. Today, the still, calm centre around which a busy modern city revolves. Perhaps we're so used to seeing those appeal boards outside churches that we don't take them very seriously. But even stone giants can die, and have. Britain is littered with the bodies of dead giants. Some you can know only by the length and breadth of their colossal graves, outlined in carefully tended turf, like this one at Old Sarum in Wiltshire. These foundations are all that's left of the original Norman Salisbury Cathedral, replaced by the famous Gothic cathedral 2 miles away. Here it's only with knowledge and imagination that you can hope to raise just the ghost of all that's been lost. Once there was a human achievement here, a building made to reach up into the sky by vision, skill, and dedication. Each one of these stone giants was an adventure of the human mind, a man-made organism, a stone shell created and given a life of its own by the pumping bloodstream of a human society. Now only tourists disturb the stillness, the desolation of this giant's grave. A cathedral that died. But once it was as full of life as the marvelous, irreplaceable old giant of York. The corpses of some of these dead giants, like this one, have been piously embalmed for us by the state. Neat lawns regularly mown, methodical repointing, full-time custodians to prevent thoughtless damage by sightseers. It's a strange irony that state funds are available for a dead church, but there's not a penny for the living ones. Are we, as a nation, going the right way about preserving our ancient cathedrals? Or would we do well to follow the example of, say, France, where the state assumes full responsibility?
I don't want to see the church in the position of a kind of tenant over against a state landlord, but we are bound now to have a new look at the matter of the state contributing to beautiful buildings which are part of the nation's heritage and, of course, which draw many, many visitors to the country from other parts of the world. But given a concordat with the state won't do it all alone, and there's still going to be the business of the voluntary raising of money as for the saving of York Minster.
Do you think, sir, that the continuity of building by generation after generation, this expression of faith that was achieved in carving and glass and wood, do you think that this still serves the church's purpose in an inspirational way?
I think that the church is served by the combination of continuity and change, and a really great Christian church has that. It's the work of a number of centuries, and some of the things done in York Minster in Christian art in quite modern times, which do show the spirit of change, are an important part of it. A great Christian church should show both continuity and change, like the Christian church itself in its calling.
To sum up, sir, what would your feelings be if you heard that York Minster had actually collapsed irretrievably into a heap of rubble?
There are worse things than the destruction of York Minster. I would say that the destruction of human lives anywhere is a worse thing than the destruction of York Minster, but nonetheless, it would just be a tragedy and a shame if York Minster did crumble into ruins, but it's not going to.
consultants are hard at work, cutting, drilling, testing, reinforcing. The operation's in progress, and the Minster's inside carries a new and complex pattern of surgical aids. But this huge patient isn't under an anesthetic. It's still carrying on its daily life and work. There's been no break with a tradition of centuries, despite all the worries and difficulties of the emergency.
There are difficulties, of course, but so far we have been able to keep all the services going with certain modifications of timetable, but evensong is sung by the full choir 6 days a week, and the big services where the nave is absolutely full of people, cathedrals are very much used, you know, for special services nowadays. These services have not been interfered with at all. It's wonderful, through the cooperation of all concerned, that we are able to maintain the worship and life of the Minster in a time like this.
But you must be looking forward, even so, to the day when all this is safely over.
Oh, we shall have a great service of thanksgiving, a tremendous celebration when the work is ended and we can look at the Minster again in all its glory.
I believe in one God.
Obviously, whatever happens and wherever the money has to come from, York Minster must be saved. It's been a centre of human activity for over 1,000 years. It's an immense historical archive, and it's much, much more than that too. It's a complex, unrepeatable masterpiece of art. We talk proudly about 20th century technology, but it would be impossible to build anything like this today. Nowadays, the accountants control the artist. Here's a vast span of stone made to soar up into the air, hundreds of thousands of cubic feet captured within stone walls, a sort of conquest of space achieved by medieval imagination, ambition, and skill. And the stone itself is enriched, cut into intricate moldings and carved into sculptures, some tenderly beautiful, some playful, even bawdy, but all with that special human touch that eludes us nowadays. The kings of England were carved on the choir screen 600 years ago by a master craftsman from Norwich. They've watched the world go by for centuries, and though they've been boxed in during this emergency, they're still there, biding their time. Here, the cold light of the 20th century is filtered through masterpieces of ancient glass and transformed into timeless medieval pictures, some illustrating medieval life and belief, as in the great east window, as big as a tennis court. A rainbow, a peacock's tail, created by John Thornton of Coventry between 1405 and 1408. And some, like the famous Five Sisters window, as abstract and mysterious as John Piper's glass in our 20th century Coventry Cathedral. Light conducted and regulated as though it was music. There's more ancient coloured glass at York than anywhere else in Britain. The whole thing, a coherent, organic translation of ideas and visions into stone and wood and glass. A gigantic achievement indeed. Yes, of course, everyone wants to save this magnificent old giant of York. And short of something like a disastrous earth tremor, I think we can and we will save it. And if we do, then I think the Minster will actually emerge even greater, more fascinating than it was before, simply because this crisis is forcing us to lay bare its hidden secrets, the lost chapters of its immensely long history.